Part 2 to Chapter 3. So now we're going to talk about the regulatory steps for new prescription drugs and the various testing stages that they must go through before approval. So there's a preclinical research and development stage. This is where the FDA is reviewing for safety. There's initial synthesis. They do animal testing throughout all of the various phases. And then we'll, in the next few slides, talk about the different phases of testing before it is marketed. So step 1 is your preclinical and research development. This is where you have a potential value in a treatment of a condition or disease. So they begin testing on at least 2 different animal species. They keep careful records on side effects, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, and which dosages are perfect for producing various effects. They test if it's carcinogenic, mutagenic, or teratogenic. The dose-response curve is determined, and this is to really find what the potency and the risks and benefits are calculated for each medication that is being tested. If it's still marketable, the data will be forwarded on to the FDA, and an investigational new drug number will be given for further testing. The next step has to do with testing on humans. One of the very important things that each person must do when you are part of any kind of clinical testing is signing an informed consent. Your informed consent is huge, and there are major travesties in history that have sort of led to having an institutional review board, and we'll talk about that in a second, and having an informed consent. So in an informed consent, there must be information on why this medication is being tested. What are the risks, the benefits? Are there any alternative choices? What are the future choices? What if this medication works for you, but it's never marketed? You need to understand that you are doing this voluntarily. You are given information on any kind of illnesses that could result, or psychological, maybe psychological things that could happen by being a part of this, and it's all potential. Everything that could potentially happen must be written in your informed consent. You need information on who to contact if you have any kind of adverse reactions, and they appreciate your volunteering to participate in this in this clinical study. And then there's a place for you to sign, the investigator to sign, and typically there is a stamp of approval from that institution's IRB, or Institutional Review Board. One of the things historically that happened was the Tuskegee experiment. That's where you had a group of researchers who really wanted to see what happens if you just let syphilis go. So initially, 600 black men were involved in the study. 399 had syphilis. 201 did not have the disease. This study was conducted without the permission or informed consent of the individuals. They didn't really understand what they were getting themselves into. They were just told that they were being treated for bad blood, which really could describe all kinds of different ailments, including syphilis, anemia, just even being fatigued. These individuals did not receive proper treatment that was needed to cure their illness. In exchange, these men were given free medical exams, meals, burial insurance. The project was only supposed to last 6 months. However, it went on for 40 years. In 1936, it was decided that researchers would follow their participants over their entire lifetime. By 1945, it was well known that penicillin was a cure for syphilis, yet it was withheld from study participants. The study ended in 1972 due to public uproar. Participants were awarded $10 million in a lifetime of medical benefits and burial services to all living participants. In 1975, their wives, widows, and offspring were added to the program. So the protection of human subjects became something very important, and in 1979, something called the Belmont Report was written, and it contained ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human rights that are involved in research. That led to the Office of Human Research Protections, or OHRP. This is what led to developing institutional review boards, or IRBs. And this OHRP is a government agency within the Department of Health and Human Services, and they provide leadership in the protection of the rights and welfare and well-being of subjects that are involved in research or conducted in the U.S. So on to step 2. Excuse me. So the three the three phases of development include first looking at around 20 to 100 healthy individuals, and at this point they establish the safety, dosage ranges, and effective treatment and side effects. During phase 2, the clinical pharmacological evaluation stage, safety still really is not established, so they accrue about 100 to 300 patients to participate, and further testing is involved to eliminate bias, determine any side effects, and effectiveness. This is known as efficacy and danger. During phase 3, the extended clinical evaluation stage, it's safely offered to about 1,000 individuals. It's something that's available on a wide experimental basis. If there's some publicity, sometimes they'll seek a licensed medical doctor to assist with the evaluation. They do safety checks and more side effects, careful analysis of effectiveness of the side effects, and recommended dosages. If the data demonstrates that it's safe and effective, it will be submitted for a new drug application. So they provide a formal request to the FDA to approve for marketing. The FDA reviews the data and analysis, and they look at, do the potential benefits justify any of the risks? Usually more tests are required before approval. So next, on to step 3, permission to market. So this allows marketing under a patented name. Average cost to do this is about $1 billion. And they may be less stringent and take less time in other countries. However, the U.S. is pretty stringent on these laws. Once it's marketed, continued close scrutiny for adverse effects is given. Then during sort of the phase 4, the post-marketing surveillance, they really look to see, are there any, now that it's distributed to the mass population, are there any additional side effects that are being seen? And this is really important because there are many medications that seemed great at the beginning. One example is Fen-Phen. It was a diet drug using a combination of 2 medications, and it was amazing. Women were losing, or men and women, but mainly women, were losing all kinds of weight because it affected the brain's sense of feeling full. You didn't have any cravings. Well, what happened with these individuals is over time taking the drug, they started to develop heart valve problems, which some were potentially fatal. So it was taken off the market. But again, you didn't really see those things until a lot more time went by with people using the drugs and more individuals using it. One person could take Fen-Phen for a year and have no adverse outcomes where another one would. So that's where you start to see the benefits of that post-marketing surveillance. So special drug marketing laws. This is the FDA process to sort of fast track any of those new drugs that, let's say you have an illness that's life-threatening. You accept the risks because the alternative is death. So this fast track rule helped to accelerate the evaluation of drugs that were really urgently needed in cases like cancer or even AIDS. And then the Prescription Drug User Fee Act of 1992, this required manufacturers to pay NDA fees, hire more reviewers, and to speed up the process during this time. regulation of non-prescription drugs. The FDA regulation of over-the-counter drugs initiated the evaluation of effectiveness and safety and proper labeling of active ingredients. So it's generally recognized as safe and effective for claimed therapeutic indication, not generally recognized as safe and effective or unacceptable indications. Insufficient data to permit final classification. So the second phase review panel recommendations for public scrutiny. Then the final ruling and classification of ingredients are given. The effects of over-the-counter review on today's medications. Many over-the-counter drug ingredients didn't satisfy the requirements, so those numbers will reduce in the future. The demand for the FDA to make better drugs available to the public for self-medication. This is where the FDA is really looking at prescription medications and looking to see, are they suitable for over-the-counter, for people to basically self-medicate. So some of the stipulations are they need to be marked as a prescription for at least 3 years or more. While it's labeled a prescription, was it used by a great number of individuals? So were there a lot of people who were taking this prescription? The adverse reactions that are associated with it must not be alarming, and the frequency of side effects must not be too high while it was available as a prescription. If it's well received but has a high abuse or misuse potential, it could also be a reason why it would not be moved over to an over-the-counter type of medication. Much public knowledge and impressions about drugs come from advertising, so the FDA does oversee most issues related to advertising of a prescription. Health professionals dictate what the consumer purchases, so the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, regulates over-the-counter advertising. Most ads really are directed to or at medical doctors, and so what happens is then people see these ads and then they go to their doctors and talk to them about the potential of taking this medication to help them with whatever ailment they have. It's really important to try to protect the public versus the right to these pharmaceutical companies to promote. So you need to make sure that the government makes sure that the ads are accurate and in good taste, but also informative. But I know all of you have seen some of those commercials, and they're almost hysterical because they talk about how great they are, everybody's so happy, and at the end could, do this to you, and they talk really, really fast. So, yeah, we need to be informed about what we take. So the federal regulation and quality assurance. So the FDA is always being criticized that they don't do too much, or they do too much. They don't do enough, or they do too much. They sometimes are very careful, almost to the extreme, but if there are any kind of serious side effects that happen with a released drug, then they get all kinds of flack as well. So I believe it's important to make sure that what we're taking is safe and effective for everyone. And one of the issues with this is that so many drugs don't work the same on everyone. Everyone is just a little different. So without having these post-surveillance things in place and really trying to see what is happening within the general public when taking this medication, we'll never know, because again, over time things can happen, and when greater numbers of individuals take a medication, that's when you see those side effects. So it's important. Clinician and patient should identify when drugs are inappropriate or maybe threatening to that individual, and regulation will most likely increase, especially with those profits, those huge profits that are associated with developing new medications. So the FDA really does need to protect the rights of our public. Drug abuse in the law. Penalty for use and trafficking. This varies by schedule and the amount of previous offenses someone has had. Laws have changed when such high demand would be impossible to enforce, so like a ban on a medication or in the instance of alcohol and prohibition. The government needed tax revenues, such as in marijuana, and the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970, which is still in effect today, it has medications that are given various classifications or schedules. And this is based on the abuse potential and the clinical usefulness of the drug. So Schedule 1, you have a high abuse potential, and at this point there's no currently approved medicinal use for the drug and no prescription available. This would be medication like heroin or LSD. Schedule 2, you have a high abuse potential. It's approved for medicinal purposes and you can get it with a prescription, but with restrictions. These are medications like PCP, cocaine, methamphetamines. Schedule 3 or 4, these are medications that have less abuse potential with a degree of government control. And Schedule 5 are least addictive and regulated. So determining the schedule, there are a series of factors that are considered when scheduling or decontrolling or rescheduling of drugs. So one is, what is the actual or relative abuse potential? Any scientific evidence of pharmacological effects? What's the scientific knowledge of the drug, history, current maybe abuse patterns or risks to the public? Any psychological or physiological dependence? What's the scope of the duration and significance of abuse? And whether substance is an immediate precursor of a substance already controlled.